Welcome to the Moon Baby Magic Podcast, a space to honor women's rites of passage stories. From menarche to menopause, the initiations of womanhood all live within our wombs. We are here to reclaim the sacredness of all of them. I'm your host, Natalie Elliott, birth keeper and women's coach specializing in womb wellness and hormonal healing. Ready for slow and sacred storytelling? Let's dive in. Welcome, women, to the first full episode of the Moon Baby Magic podcast. This feels like a really big step in my journey, and I'm so grateful that you are all here to receive the stories that the women who I've been interviewing are here to tell. These stories are really big stories. Some of the most impactful lessons and blessings these women have received in their lives. So I encourage you to bring yourself into an open and receptive state so that you may take these stories in and truly connect with the women who are telling them to you. Whatever you find most nourishing, whether that's a cup of tea or a brisk walk, I encourage you to give yourself that gift of nourishment. And make sure to give yourself a little bit of integration time after you listen so that these stories can sink into your body and you can come back to your day-to-day reality. Storytelling really does take us on a journey. So if you feel a little bit out of sorts after listening and need some time, know that that's totally normal and you deserve to give yourself a little space to integrate after. The women who I've been speaking to have such important stories to tell. So I hope that you take them in and I hope that you love them. So without further ado, on this first episode, I have the great pleasure of dropping into the medicine stories of Kate Oakley. Kate is a wonderfully wise woman who, at 25 years old, has already lived many lives. In her community, Kate is a leader, hosting women's circles, attending sovereign birth, and caring for the postpartum moms. Her own journey to healing her womb, becoming a wise woman, and birthing in power is nothing short of inspiring and oh so interesting. You seriously won't be able to stop listening. So let's dive in. Okay, welcome, Kate. I'm so happy you're here.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So this is fun to have you. I remember we met 2 years ago at Matriarch Rising in 2022, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. And I just remember you were so sweet. You walked up to me and another woman, and you had this big smile on your face. And you were like, "Hi, sisters. What are your names?" I was like, wow, a literal angel just approached me.
Oh, thanks for reminding me of that. I'm so glad I did. I just felt a natural magnetism towards you. And, um, there's a lot of mothers at Matriarch Rising, which I love and is amazing. And I also was there very deep and grounded in the maidenhood time of my life, which I'm not in anymore, as we'll get into. And so just to connect with other maidens who were looking ahead at, this path of motherhood that is unique to that community was so exciting to me to connect with you. So yeah, I'm so glad we met then when we did, and here we are.
I know, and it's been cool to just sort of watch your journey unfold. I know we both did the Blood Mystery School as well, so we have that in common.
And
And
RBK also, right?
yeah, RBK. Oh my gosh. So really similar life paths. I am still in the maiden phase of my life, and you, as you kind of mentioned before, you're in the mother phase of your life now.
I'm in the mother phase of my life, in early motherhood. My daughter is 13 months old.
Mm.
And I currently, though, within that, am in the maiden phase of my cycle. My bloods have returned since giving birth. And so that actually feels really beautiful to be here.
Yeah, it's such a perfect time to come and like chat away in that phase of your cycle.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, maybe we could start there. Like, if you want to, you said, your blood has returned, your cycle has returned. How has that been?
Oh, it's been an initiation of just relearning my body and a new layer of getting to know myself. Yeah, and just seeing how my body has changed, my fluids have changed, and because of prolactin suppressing ovulation, and I'm still breastfeeding, um, my cycle didn't just come back and then was super regular, which I think is a common story for most postpartum women. And so it was sort of like a test for me to use all of this wisdom and the tools and the education from the blood mystery school that I had under my belt and have this opportunity to relearn my body and await this sacred return. And it really felt like a spiral through time, right? Where I could see myself, the circle had returned to the point that I looked back and saw myself as in my menarche of like, when's my blood gonna come? What's it gonna be like? But it's from a different vantage point, right? Because we're further ahead in the spiral of time. But I saw myself in that way of being curious about it and waiting for it and wanting to really track my fluids to make sure that I didn't accidentally conceive before my blood's return, which can
Mhm.
happen. And yeah, so it came back and was a little irregular at first, but now we're back in a healthy flow, and that just feels really good.
That's beautiful. I can imagine that's kind of, yeah, just exciting. And I remember you sharing in a Zoom call we were both on in the Free Birth Society membership when you were pregnant about how it was just so interesting to not have the map of the cycle to rely on. And you were just kind of in that. And yeah, so I imagine like getting it back, it was like a long awaited reuniting.
Oh yeah, I was longing. I was yearning for, I loved being pregnant and I was so excited to be pregnant, but I had just been so committed to tending to my womb and my inner seasons and shining light on that and interest and curiosity and really having this map that is the wisdom of my body to orient to of the cyclical way of living. And my whole life was just completely oriented towards that. And so while I was pregnant and going through lunar cycles of the month, it's just a much longer cycle,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
And so I felt lost at times, and I had this inquiry for other wise women to share with me, like, what are ways that I can connect with a cyclical way of living and being through pregnancy? Um, and I think that's something that I still am wondering about. I definitely found solace and connection and comfort in connecting deeper with just the moon, of course,
mhm.
moon cycles. But I can imagine in future pregnancies, maybe creating more intentional ritual for myself to be an anchor in that way and into presence.
Yeah, no, it's so beautiful. Yeah, it is interesting. And I've heard that feedback, following the cycles of the moon for women who, yeah, like haven't gotten their bleeds back postpartum and really are looking to like retune into that cyclical way. So I love that like provided some solace for you. Another thing I wanted to just a thread I wanted to pull from what you said is you mentioned looking at your fluids to make sure I didn't conceive before I actually bled. And I think that that's an important topic. So maybe say more about that.
Oh, I don't know that I have much to say, just we're juicy beings and I have lots of arousal fluid and a passionate relationship with my man. And so um, just always checking in and being like, okay, like, is there more cervical fluid that I'm seeing? Um, yeah, I didn't start temp tracking before my blood came back. Just it felt like one other thing to do and all that I was holding and am still holding in new motherhood. So um yeah, I wasn't that vigilant and I really trusted that I would know and I would just feel a lot of other symptoms and signals in my body.
Mhm.
Um So yeah, it was just more of like holding that self-inquiry.
Yeah, and important to note that like you can ovulate before bleeding. And I think maybe a lot of women would be waiting until they bleed to think that they have their cycle back, but that's not really how it happens.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for saying that more clearly for anyone out there who might not know that. It's really, yeah, important to know.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. So, yeah, I love how deeply connected you are with your cycles. And I'm always really, yeah, just really impressed and in reverence of women who are walking that path. And I would love for you to share a little bit about, I mean, like going all the way back to the beginning, your first bleed, your menarche. What was that? What was that like for you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's such an honor to be asked these questions and to just normalize sharing these stories at this time. Um, so, the most truthful place to begin when I'm telling the story of my first bleed is really with my older sister. So, I'm the middle of three girls, and we're all about 2 years apart. And so naturally, I learned about it became on my radar that I would menstruate because my older sister did first. And my mom has always been someone who's very open with us about her body and always, would be changing tampons or bleeding in front of us or doing her version of cycle tracking in front of us. And I'm really grateful for that, actually.
Wow.
So it was, yeah, just the fact that women bleed and it happens every month and it's normal was pretty, yeah, not really like a big deal for us in our household. But it certainly was of like, when is that going to happen? And at that time in our lives, I believe my older sister was 12 years old when she got her first blood. So I was 10. And that was a time in our life where we just had a lot of conflict between us, a lot of like jealousy and butting heads, and just kind of, starting to have this blossoming of our hormones. I think that's pretty normal um, among sisters. And so the way that I found out that my sister, I didn't tell her I was going to tell her version of this story on here, so hopefully that's okay with her. I'm sure it would. The way that I found out that my older sister got her first bleed is so interesting. I was in the kitchen one day and I found this little note on the kitchen counter. Um, and it was attractive to me because there was this piece of paper that had so many folds and bends in it. And I was like, oh, what's this? I was always super nosy and curious. And I was like, what's this little note? And uh yeah, I guess I'm disappointed in my mom for just leaving it out, like to be found by anyone. But there I found it. I'm grateful I did. And it was this note from my sister telling my mom that she had received her first blood. And I of course don't remember exactly what it said, but the tone of it I'll always remember was like very shy, almost embarrassed, kind of like squeamish, or that was the tone. And the text that her handwriting, it started big and normal size, and as it got closer and closer to the bottom of the note, it got smaller and smaller, and it said something like, "Hey mom, I just wanted to let you know that, well, da, 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 da," and I got my period, and it said the word period like was the last word of the note, and it was written so tiny on the bottom of the page, and it like the text made this little triangle and there was a box around the word period, and it was in this note was the manifestation of all of her cultural conditioning, which comes from wherever it comes from, to feel shy or embarrassed or maybe even shameful that she had had this experience. And obviously she felt it was important enough to communicate. She wasn't going to keep it a secret, but also not something that she felt comfortable for whatever reasons to communicate directly. And so having this note was her way of doing it. And so for me, as a 10-year-old, curious, knowing that was on the horizon for me, but not yet going through that portal, I was like, obsessed. I just thought it was so interesting that I had like been this little detective and I found out. And um we moved homes from the home that I first found that note in, like recently, like soon after. And in the new home we moved to, my sister had her own bedroom and it had a little bathroom off of her room. And I always was so jealous and kind of thought, well, why does she get her own bathroom? And, it was very much because my parents were like, well, she's bleeding, she needs to have her privacy or whatever, whatever. But I would love going into her bathroom where she had a little drawer next to the toilet where she had tampons. And I was like, whoa, what are these? And
That's amazing.
as like a mischievous 10-year-old annoying little sister, I needed to signal to her somehow that I knew that she had her blood. And
Mm,
so, yeah, I mean, I was just obsessed. I thought it was so interesting. And of course, that is because there is this innate knowing in us, even as young women, that this is sacred and
yeah.
beautiful and profound. Um, and so I would always go in there, and my way of communicating to her that I knew was that I like took some of her tampons and I put them in her bed. And I think I even wrote like a note to her that was like, haha.
That is so funny.
And, it's a little cruel. I think I wanted to like make fun of her, but that was just the more surface level. It was more like I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And when was that going to happen to me? And I wanted to be connected, right, to it in some way. And that was my way of creating connection for myself. And so I had, yeah, exposure to tampons. And I remember like learning, like I need to learn how I use these so I'm ready, because since I had an older sister, I didn't ever want to be taught anything. I always wanted to like be like, yeah, well, duh, that's just how you do it. I already know. So I remember like putting in tampons before I even ever had bled because I wanted to like know how it worked. And that was a horrible experience. Like, I always
Oh my
remember
gosh,
how
wow.
dry and ouch it felt. And I was like,
No.
whoa, okay, never doing that again. So, okay, that was like the beginning of my story. And then I did not get my blood until I was 13. So
Mm.
I definitely, there was a bit of a waiting because I think my sister was 12. And so I was like, had this year where I was like, come on, it could be any day now. But I think at that point, I wasn't thinking about it as much anymore. It did feel more normal for me. I wanted to.
Can I ask, like,
Cycle.
did you, sorry,
Go ahead.
you, did you and your sister ever talk about it? Like after that day with the tampons in her bed, did she say like, hey, Kate, let's talk about this?
Hey, why did you do that?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I
Yeah.
don't think so. Yeah, and that sort of just speaks to the nature of our relationship at the time. We're very, very close now, but we were pretty competitive back then, and
Yeah.
um, she probably just was like, ugh, like whatever, this is annoying. And I don't, we may have, but I don't remember any conversation actually at all. And I think that she kind of maybe wanted to sort of hide, like, it was her private thing. And here's my annoying little sister trying to butt into this really exciting thing. And it's not her turn yet for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually don't remember any conversations with my sister about blood, really.
Mm.
I'm sure we had them as teenagers at times, like, oh, I'm on my period or whatever, but I don't
Mm.
really remember any until I was older, maybe like 19 or so, and I'll touch on that later probably. But yeah, so I was 13. I first remember getting my blood actually. I remember being at school. It's possible that I woke up and saw a little bit of something, a little, blood in my underwear. Um, but I don't remember. Yeah, and maybe that is what happened. I woke up and saw a little bit, but didn't think much of it because it was just such a small amount, or wasn't really sure if that was the real thing. And I always woke up so late before getting to school. So I was probably just rushing and not really being present with my body. But then my flow really started picking up when I was at school. And it was just the most exciting day. Of course, I had to leave class like hundreds of times to go to the bathroom as many times as possible to see what was happening. And even though I knew about options like tampons and pads or whatever, I distinctly remember that there was no way I was going to use a tampon for my first bleed because I knew intuitively, even if it wasn't like a conscious thought, that my blood was sacred and interesting and profound, and I wanted to see it, and I wanted to be in relationship with it, and just like observe my body. Wow, what's happening? How much is coming out? And it felt like so much. And I spoke a little bit to like the weirdness in my relationship with my sister at that time as teenagers. Um, so instead, I sought out two of my sister's closest friends who I was really familiar with, and they were older. And, of course, I knew that they had their periods, and both of them were the youngest of their families. They didn't have younger siblings. So I had like this little sister connection with them. And these older girls who were, yeah, really like big sisters to me were so excited. And I think I sought them out because I knew that they would meet me in my celebration, and they would be like, oh, little Kate, like this is so exciting, and just mirror that back to me that I was so desperate for it and really, wanted. I think there is part of all of us that wants to be acknowledged and initiated and celebrated because, yeah, even if our culture doesn't reflect our blood back to us, I think that is like an innate knowing. At least it was for me. So I sought out them and was just obsessed with seeing how much blood, how much toilet paper I was going through, because I was just wadding that in, and kept telling them like, oh my gosh, I had to change it 10 times already. I have so much blood. uh, yeah. And I was really excited about it. And very quickly it became normal. And, then my mom always bought us organic cotton tampons with no applicator. And I'm glad that she did that. I don't use tampons now, and I don't like putting anything up inside of me. Which I'm sure is a topic you'll cover at some point on this podcast, or we could get into. But my mom always used tampons, so that was what was given to us. And somewhere along the way of my life, I picked up a story. It might have been from my mom. I don't know where this phrase came from. It's horrible. Um, and the phrase is pad baby. And I didn't want to be a pad baby. It was like, if you use pads, it's like a diaper in your pants and you're not woman enough. I don't know. Like I've had this,
Get it.
yeah, I had this story that like tampons is the more, mature,
Yeah.
cool, whatever thing to,
Well, that was totally a cultural narrative.
okay. So it wasn't just me.
No, I had that too, for sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, which is sad, and now
Yeah.
that would be my preference. I don't like using like manufactured disposable anything, and they usually have weird fragrances, whatever. I love using my period underwear, free bleeding. But anyhow, so my mom gave us, a box. Oh, and I might even have it here with me. There's really weird tampon case that my mom found somewhere along the way. I don't know, it's somewhere in here, that it's, yeah, I should have had it out ahead of time. Oh, here, yes, I did find it. Okay, this is what my mom gave to me and my sisters. And this was actually part of how I knew I was going to get my period, is because my mom bought these when I was maybe like 7 or 8 years old, and she squirreled them away because she thought that they were this special until we got our periods. Oh, get ready. It's a man named Vinny, and Vinny, this creepy man, is telling me, know your flow. And he's pointing with his finger for anyone who's listening and not watching. It's this tampon case that says, Vinny's know your flow. Yeah. Tampon case holds a bunch, and it's like on his fists, and it's like this weird masculine,
Why?
remember to refill. And here's Vinny like listening to music and like,
Why is it a man?
why is it a man? Horror, like what the heck, mom? So I got my tampon case, and I wanted plastic, whatever I don't know what the brands are called, Playtex Tampax, something,
Yeah.
with those pink shiny applicators, because
Yeah.
those are so cool. Then you don't have to get your finger bloody and whatever. Is just absolute poison for the body. So I'm glad that, and my parents were separated. So my dad, he would, whatever tampons we wanted, like,
Yeah.
sure, whatever. I don't want to talk about it. But fortunately there was only a few years that I used those for, until my mom was like, absolutely not, this is poison.
That's great that you had an influence like that. You know, most women, I mean, I shouldn't say most because I haven't spoken to most women, but a lot of women that I've spoken to, yeah, that was not a priority for whoever was buying them period products to have it be organic and fragrance free and without an applicator even. That's really, yeah, it's really special. You had someone to show you sort of like a baby step along the way like that.
It is. And my mom has been so amazing in so many ways for just paving this path to more alternative holistic health modalities. And yeah, I love that she gave us tampons without applicators because you actually have to touch your body. You actually have
Yeah.
to like at least have your finger towards the opening of your yoni to put it in there and probably get blood on your finger. So it does necessitate a level of connection that I'm grateful for, even if they were never my favorite
I know.
choice.
I mean, yeah, I couldn't imagine doing that in my first years of bleeding. I was similar. Like, I intuitively wanted to wear pads as well, which I'm so grateful for now. But I had the same thing of like, oh, like I don't think I had the term pad baby, but I do remember there was this like kind of
Good.
cool girl thing about wearing tampons. So interesting. So, okay, that was your first bleed, and that you were mostly sharing it with your sister's friends, kind of like your step in big sisses in that moment, which is so sweet. I just love that. And for them to mirror your excitement, that's such a nice thread to have in your womb story, to have that excitement mirrored. I think that's really special.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then what happens next? Like, do you talk to your mom about it? What is that situation like?
Yeah. So because of just the culture of my older sister and it already kind of like, I don't have any brothers. So, and my mom was always very open with us, like, because women menstruating was almost so normalized in my home growing up. There was a void and a lack of the excitement, the honor, the reverence. And it was also kind of looked at, or at least this is what I picked up, that it was like a burden. And so my mom and I had an extremely contentious relationship through all of my teens. And I remember that I had received my blood. I wanted to tell her. I was only living with her part-time at the time because I went to a school that was closer to my dad's house. So I probably didn't see her that very day or whenever I did see her. Um, I remember there was some conflict, like she wasn't in a good mood. Maybe we were already fighting about something, but I had this burning desire that I think all young women do to tell their mothers that they have gone through this rite of passage. And I kept waiting like for like I was like, oh, I'm gonna tell my mom. And then we were together and there was conflict. So I was just waiting and waiting until the right time. And the right time was just not coming. And so it came out, which was very characteristic of our communication style at the time, like these explosive, angry, and yeah, it's so sad. It was almost as if I was telling it to her because I wanted her to she was being mean to me and I wanted her to feel bad that this big thing was going on for me, but here we were fighting. And so I was like, well, I guess you should know I got my period. Like it was very dramatic when I told her. And her response, because it was in the heat of whatever was going on between us, um, was very much like, scowl and eye roll and like, of course, like I have to deal with this. And yeah, that's how it was received. And I don't remember like the specifics of our conversation or whatever, but I will definitely always, well, I guess I could choose to let go of it at any time, but I have this imprint of the way that that story was received by my mom as though it was something she didn't have time for, something that was inconvenient for her. Um, and yeah. So I'm really, really glad that the first people that I told, I had the intuition to know to share that with women in my life, young women who would be able to celebrate it with me. And so, yeah, it was very normal. I think like she gave me a box of tampons and eventually this Vinnie's case. Um, she had the intention to do something, even if it's like super weird that there's this creepy man on it. But
Yeah, the intention
that's
is
a
there.
lot more than some women receive from their mothers. So I honor her for doing her best.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, like how impactful the words from our mothers are in those first moments. And yeah, I think it's like that in any rite of passage, right? Because your first bleed is really like, as women, our first big rite of passage, our first blood mystery. And so like it amplifies things that happen during that time are amplified. So I can imagine that was, yeah, like had some sort of impact on you to hear that it was an inconvenience.
Yeah, and I certainly internalized it, and the excitement, excuse me, that I felt initially very rapidly transformed to, yeah, the way that I was received by my mother, that this is an inconvenience, this is a burden, this is something I just have to get through. And that was amplified by the culture of the other girls in my school of like, oh, this sucks, you know, yeah, just it being something that was negative, something that we had to get through, something that was associated with pain and inconvenience and X, Y, and Z. That was, yeah, very, very much the culture of all of my friends and the girls that I knew at school at the time. And so, yeah, the way that I felt about it definitely shifted. And I didn't treat my blood as sacred. It was very much something that was disposed of. Um, yeah, but I never felt like it was gross. I never felt like disgusted by my body. Um, so I'm really glad, I think, because of the way that my mom was always very yeah, just interactive with her blood, and that was something I witnessed. Um, yeah, that had a meaningful impact for me just to like, yeah, normalize it in that way, I guess.
Yeah, I love how you said too at the beginning of your story. I mean, this whole time I've just been thinking about like how sweet like little Kate getting excited to have her first bleed is. And then like just that image is like so sweet. You're like taking your sister's tampons. You're just like, I want a woman now. It's such sweet imagery. But then also just thinking like how amazing it is that you wanted to see your blood. Like that was your first like really pure and wholesome response to it was like, I want to see this. Like, I'm interested in this. I think that's so special. Um, but it seems like you said that kind of went away for a little bit, once the culture took its mark. Does that feel right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was 14, I went to boarding school. I switched
Mm,
schools actually. And that was the first time that I think I turned 15 by the time that I started on hormonal birth control, but because I was at boarding school in Vermont actually, and I was born and raised in New York, um, as I remember it, I could just go to the health office and ask for birth control, and it wasn't something that they needed parental consent from. Um, and even if they did, I think my mom probably would have accepted. So yeah, because I can't really remember. I think maybe some states you have to be 16 actually, and you can get hormonal birth control without parental consent. So I don't remember what it was in Vermont. Either way, I was 15 years old when I started.
mm,
And yeah, maybe is that okay if I transition to sort of talking more about my birth control
yeah.
journey?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so oh gosh, I shiver to
Mm,
recall this, but it's my story. That the very first birth control that I went on was the I think it's pronounced Depo-Provera shot, which
mm,
is a shot that I received in my thigh every 3 months. And there were some older, yeah, I was a sophomore, my second year of high school. Um, and all of my friends were seniors very quickly. And so, I've always looked up to older girls in my life, and that's, I think, very normal. And so I wanted to do what the cultural norm was for them and what was cool and acceptable. And I think some of them were on this depot shot, and the story that I heard is, oh, it's great, you have to get enter this little shot, but then you don't have to take a pill every day, you only have to do it every 3 months. So it's easier, it's more convenient. And of course,
Mm,
we've talked about the cultural story I picked up was that my menstrual cycle, part of the cycle, was an inconvenience. And so here's this great technology that's going to make it more convenient. Of course, I want that one because I knew that there was options like an IUD or the Nexplanon implant, which we'll get to. But at that time, that felt a little too long lasting. I think the curiosity part of me that like wanted to see my blood and really ultimately craved being in relationship with my body was like, well, I don't want to take a pill every day because what if I forget? And I started becoming sexually active. So I, certainly didn't want to become pregnant. But I didn't want to just like have something done to me like an IUD or an implant where I didn't like it severed my relationship because I could just turn my brain off and not think about it. And with the 3 month interval, it was like, well, I still have to engage with my body. I still have to like have an appointment and get the shot. And yeah, so the part of me that really actually craved being in deep relationship with my body, I think chose that option. It was
yeah.
wonderful. I think I don't really remember what my side effects were that made me eventually want to get off of it. Um, but I may have even stayed on that for the duration of that school year. And I switched high schools 3 times, which is a
Wow.
lot. And so I was only at boarding school for that 1 year. So maybe what happened was that I moved schools, and it wasn't easy for me to have access to that shot anymore, is probably what happened. I don't recall any specifically like horrible side effects,
Hmm.
but there probably were, and I was just like asking them or didn't know to look at them because, yeah, in my adult life I've learned that form of hormonal birth control is some constituents in it are used for like male chemical castration,
Yeah,
um,
I've heard that too.
which, yeah, is so terrifying that that was in my young maiden body. So the
Well, and
next
just like
step, go ahead.
also like quite criminal that like someone was allowed to do that to you. Like even if you were consenting, like the fact that that's even an option for women is like very scary and yeah, criminal.
Well said. I agree. And it's something I have reflected on previously is that because as young women, we crave initiation and accurately being reflected back to, and that doesn't exist in our culture in a lot of places, at least it didn't for me. What then takes place of the void is still an initiation, still a rite of passage, but it's birth control that fills
Yeah.
that void. For me, it was. And that was the culture, I think, at my school too, where it was like, oh, you're on birth control. Well, that signals that you have your period. That signals that you may or may not be, but probably are sexually active. And
Mhm.
if those things are true about you, then how mature, how cool, whatever the belief is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I observed many girls, and myself included, wanting to signal to our peers our initiation, this rite of passage, and it was birth control that took the place. And I think that that's just so devastating and so heartbreaking. And I really wonder how the culture will shift when we do properly initiate young girls, and they won't feel that need, hopefully, to like fill that void with what is the cultural norm of these poisons.
Yeah, so true. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So the next step of my hormonal birth control journey was going to the Nexplanon arm implant, which
Mm.
I still have a tiny little scar
Oh,
from.
wow.
And I had that, I think you can keep it in for 3 years, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong about this. I think I had it for maybe close to 2. It was in there for a while. And yeah, just so creepy. That part of my memory recollection is a little bit foggier, which is interesting because also my connection to my womb was obviously numbed out with all of these
Mm.
interventions. And so it's interesting that it's just a little bit foggy, but I had that put in, and I didn't get my cycle anymore. Um, and I remembered thinking like, oh, well, that's convenient. Like, okay, here's been a more permanent solution to, not permanent, thankfully, but a more long lasting solution to this inconvenience as I was holding that story at that time. And eventually it began to happen that my blood did return, but it was very dark and would last for more than a week at a time, maybe multiple weeks at a time. So I was having long period, which makes sense, right? Of course, like all of this stagnation. And I didn't like that. And I realized that my body was yelling at me, something's
Mm.
wrong. And I didn't want to have this like brown, pasty blood in my underwear all the time. So I knew, okay, like my body's ready to be done with this. I had that removed. And I think in between the depot shot and the Nexplanon, I obtained the pill because
Mm.
I was like, well, I need to, have something to protect me and
Mm.
heartbreak in this in between. So I was like, and a lot of my friends took that. It was easy for me to obtain at the clinic. And I think I went back on that in between the Nexplanon and then finally getting an IUD. Heartbreak. So my story is just like such an arsenal of attacks on my body from
Mm.
basically all of the different options that I knew
Yeah.
about. Um, and yeah, I had my IUD put in, and by that point, because yeah, this is, over the years, I think I was 18. And actually, I think I might have already been 19. And a couple of months after I had that put in, my mother took me to the jungle in Peru to initiate me in a different way through working with plant medicine. And in my very first ayahuasca ceremony, my the medicine was this um opened this passage of communication for me with my body,
Mm.
and my womb was screaming. She was like, get this out. That was the very first teaching from, infinite teachings from those medicine experiences. And I knew that was my mission. As soon as I get back to the States, this is coming out. And that was what I did. I made an appointment
Wow.
for as quick as I could. And that was the very end of my journey with hormonal birth control. But it's worth saying that in that ceremony and the way that that channel opened for me to be in communication with my body that I hadn't previously experienced, I also had an experience of hearing the voice of my yoni for the very first time, being
Mm.
in conversation with her and witnessing her and hearing her cry, hearing her little sad voice
Mm.
cry about all of the ways that I was not honoring her and treating her ultimately in the reverence and divinity that she is and deserves.
Mm.
So that was a very profound experience for me and a big, big
Wow.
wake up call. And really, in many ways, yeah, began my trajectory into healing. And the first step of that is reclaiming the power of our wombs and our cycles, and that can only happen in an uninhibited way where we are cycling naturally and not having devices or synthetic hormones altering the state of our bodies. Yeah.
Wow. So, okay, so many threads there. That's incredible. Your mom decided to take you to ayahuasca when you were 19?
She did. She did.
Wow.
Such an infinite blessing in my life. And yeah, one thing I'll say about that, people are always very wowed when I share that. They always say, "Oh, you and your mom must be so close." And we weren't. We were so
Mm.
fractured, and there was so much pain and agony in our relationship, which is actually that decision of her and that invitation for me was really out of desperation for healing. And I was raised by a nanny from the day I was born,
Mhm.
Silvana, an amazing Guatemalan woman that I love and still have a very active relationship with her.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, she's very much my mother in a lot of ways as well.
Mhm.
And um, yeah, what I want to say clearly, I guess, is that my mom had a lot of wounding in her life. And so she has been able to recognize her limitations in her mothering, and what she's been able to do about it is resource my sisters and I. And so when she knew that she wouldn't be the ideal fit mother for babies and young children, which is, something that she has many times admitted, she resourced us to Silvana. She found this mothering for us, this profound woman that I'm so grateful for, who raised me very much. And then when I was a teenager and, I didn't need a nanny anymore, Silvana didn't live with us, but my mom and I were like just oil and water. It was
Mm.
rough. She knew, okay, I'm failing to parent this teenager, this young woman, and she needs something. She needs guidance, she needs connection, we need healing. And so she resourced me to Mother Ayahuasca. So
Wow.
she found she's always been able to find these mothering resources for me. And there aren't words to describe how grateful I am for that. And so she brought me to the jungle and delivered me to the mothering that I needed at that time.
Wow. Yeah. So your womb awakening really happened at age 19. That's so special, in a lot of ways I mean, it's older compared to, ideally we learn to be in tune with our wombs from the time of our first bleed, but really in context of the culture we live in, like that's really early to be like coming home to yourself in that way. So it's so special, so impactful that opened you up like that.
Thank you. Yeah. And I remember feeling some grievance because, it took probably at least a year for my body, maybe more, to regulate after so many years of suppression and poisons. That I don't feel like it was until I was 2021 that I really started cycling in a normal, healthy way and being aware of my cycle and reclaiming this knowledge and wisdom. And I went through a big grief process because when I compared myself to friends of mine that I just admired so much, who had never been on any birth control, who had just been in their vibrant, vital, natural, healthy, wild, feminine bodies and bled, I was like, whoa, you have something that I, you know, need to do some remembering work around, that I need to uncover, because I felt like as a young woman in my early 20s, 2021, like I was going through my menarche. I felt like I had no wisdom or data or relationship with my body's seasons and cycles because I had been suppressing them and never tracking them. I didn't even know what it meant and felt like to cycle normally. I didn't know what it felt like to ovulate. I had never consciously tracked my cervical fluid, didn't know anything about that. And so I was angry and in grief about, like, wow, here's, 7 years of data of, cycling 13 cycles per year approximately, or whatever. I could have had all of this data and information about my body over the years, and now I'm starting from scratch. And I felt like, a little, prepubescent. I felt like a little girl going through menarche for the first time, of learning the wisdom of my body at that time.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. And it's interesting, yeah, that you say that it really took you like a few more years in between that to feel fully embodied in what you were doing. So I'm curious, like what those years looked like. Like what sort of, so the ayahuasca experience connecting with your womb, that really propelled you along the path. And what steps did you take besides removing the IUD after that experience?
Oh my goodness. Well, It's a big story, but I'll just speak about it briefly, I guess. That part of the experience that I went through in Peru was a dieta. So I was working with ayahuasca, but I was also working with other master healing plants. I was working with this amazing plant called Planta de la Vida,
Mm.
and to be in right relationship with her required a very strict diet in my whole life. So for months, as I continued working with this plant, I was trying to heal a skin condition. I wasn't eating salt, fat, acid, spice, sugar. Um, I wasn't eating meat at the time. I was um, in choosing to remain celibate. I wasn't, engaging with coffee or alcohol or any types of substances that previously had been very frequent in my life. So that was actually the first time in many years that I had been truly sober. Um, and in some ways, what what working with that plant was asking of me and in the ways that I was curating my life and my diet um, was very restrictive and not actually giving me the nutrients that I needed. And it's also, this is sort of a tangent, but worth saying that I when I was 8 years old, 9 years old, decided that I wanted to be vegetarian. And so
Wow.
I didn't eat meat for like uh 12 years or something. And that next phase of my life was really intense because I was really looking inward, really integrating these medicine teachings from that experience, the experiences I had had in Peru. I was continuing to work with Planta de la Vida in this way where I was completely honoring her and going really inward. And so, in some ways, it was this massive cleansing that my body was doing over the course of many months. And I was still in school. I graduated college when I was 21, and I was really honoring my sobriety at the time. And then I just started working like so much.
Mm.
So, and then I met my now husband when I was 21 later in that year. And that was a big part of my healing journey too, because of many wonderful gifts and blessings he's brought into my life, steak and meat and bacon and just like amazing, nourishing foods and fats, and was something that very quickly I realized would be part of our life together and something that I desired and was ravenous for in so many ways. Um, yeah, so that was how I guess cleansed and then started really getting healthy when I started to actually feed my body nutrients. Go figure.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like this is actually quite a common theme, and it is a theme in my story as well of like going first. For me, it was like veganism, so a little bit different than what you're sharing, but um, for me, it was veganism, and then after that period of, I think it was needed, right? Like that period of veganism to like get me to like just be in relationship with what I was putting in my body, to be conscious about that. And then from there, moving into a deeper nourishment place. And I've heard that from a lot of women that they kind of go this like super cleansing route of eating. And then eventually that's just not needed anymore. And we can come back to like our full, true ancestral nourishment that like our wombs are calling for.
Totally. And it's so interesting, like how dysregulated my hormones were because of just my diet, like let alone all of the, poisons and toxins I had been exposing myself to over the years, just not having nutrients. Um, I remember the way that I used to eat nuts, like, and I had a vegan
Mm.
phase too. Like, I would just pound bags of nuts because I was just desperate for fats or protein or something. And yeah, once I actually started eating animal fats and proteins, which was what my body really needed to be well nourished, that like completely vanished. And it just indicates to me, yeah, I don't know, the ability. I could never sit down now and eat like an entire giant bag of nuts.
I know.
My body was like screaming.
No, it's so interesting. Yeah, I can just relate in so many ways to the nuts, and now nuts actually kind of hurt my stomach if I eat too
Yeah,
many of them.
me
But for
too.
me, it was really like, and I'll just share this quickly. Like it was avocado was a big thing. Like I was eating avocado for every meal back then.
Yeah,
And nowadays, like I still like avocado, but I don't need it even every day, you know?
yeah.
And then the other thing for me too that I realized that's so interesting is I used to be obsessed with like soaps or shampoos or whatever that had like milk and honey as like the ingredients. And I can track that now as like, oh my gosh, I wanted fat, I wanted nourishment, I wanted like, this like feminine thing in my life, and I was depriving myself of it eating. So I was craving it and like the things I was putting on my body, which is so fascinating to look back on.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you start eating meat and
I would
that
consider that like the threshold of the beginning of my conception journey, to be honest.
Okay, well
Uh,
yeah, I would love to talk about that.
yeah, so maybe I'll transition there. Yeah, and I know you specifically asked me about a story of my last blood mystery before becoming pregnant. So yeah, what needs to be shared to get to that point?
Yeah.
Um, well, we'll just fast forward a little bit. The craziness of Rona erupted in the world, and I was living in San Francisco at the time, having had graduated college and was working, and I knew I wasn't going to be in lockdown in a city, so I sold all of my belongings, probably 80 to 90% of them, on little garage sales with my roller skates on, just moved to San Francisco and finally saved up enough money to buy a van with one of my best friends at the time. Then we were so stoked about this idea of moving into a van together and traveling cross country. And that's what we did. And like everyone else was shutting themselves in and thought we were totally crazy. That I guess it was May of 2020. We bought our van and took off on a cross country road trip to bounce between national parks and farms. And
Wow.
in those, yeah, so there's a lot that came from being in deep sisterhood at that
Mhm.
time and living with a woman that held a lot of the same values as I did of how we oriented towards our bodies. Um, and that was when I really started like giving my blood to the earth
Mm.
much more ritualistically, because I was living in a city before. So I think I may have, given some to some house plants, but not really. Um, and actually, this is just one little tangent that before I move way on into the motherhood chapter, that I want to touch on, is that at one point here at this time in my life, my older sister moved out to Berkeley, California, and I got to really revitalized my relationship with her. And she was living in a home in Berkeley with 8 other women. And
Mm.
in their home, they had like this altar in their bathroom where they would all pour their menstrual blood in together into this jar. And there's
Wow.
so much more I could say about the wisdom and wise woman, witchy teachings that I got from my sister and the women that she lived with at that time. But um, again, it circles back to the guidance of our older sisters, which, is relevant for all of us, whether we have blood relations with sisters or not. That I remember a friend of my sister sharing with me what a friend of hers had told her one time, and she was just like, "Oh, I just love bleeding on the earth." And that was so impactful to my sister that she relayed that to me, this like cute,
Mm.
very whimsical farmer friend of hers. And I was like, yeah, like that's actually the vibe that I'm trying to cultivate, bleeding on the earth. And so yeah, thanks to my sister, I really started yeah, uh stopped using tampons and wanted to collect my blood, wanted to be in more conscious relationship with it, then was living in the van, traveling cross country, and just being, in the elements, as I said, bouncing between national parks and farms.
Mm.
And I think in those few years, I drove cross country 5 times, and it was just like really in this mobility lifestyle. Um, yeah, and actually, yeah, let's see. Yeah, we have time for this story. Before I conceived with my daughter Margot, I had another pregnancy that I was totally not thinking about that chapter of my story, but maybe I'll just briefly touch on that first before talking about the conception of Margot, because that really is significant in my initiation. So
Yeah.
here I was traveling all over the country in my van. At one point, my friend ended up moving out. I bought her out of the van because naturally, unsurprisingly, living in a van with another person can be challenging.
Oh, yeah.
So I was in this very like fast-paced mobility lifestyle of always getting to the next destination. And I was driving back west after spending some time farming on the East Coast and connecting with Sebastian, my now husband, on the East Coast a little bit. And then I took off to be solo from him again. I'm driving back solo cross country. This was around the time that I first found out about the Free Birth Society podcast that I totally
Mm.
started binging. And I'm just like devouring episodes. I get to Austin, Texas, where I was going to be staying with a friend, a long-term family friend. And it was the first time in a while that I was staying with a friend and not just camping. And so I pull up in front of her house, run in, so excited to see her, realize that I had kind of parked like an asshole and needed to move my van. And I get in and it won't start. And I was like, oh shoot. And so my van totally broke down right in front of her
Um,
house. And it forced me to slow down. It forced me to look inward and
mm,
realize, I'm pretty due for my blood. And where is it? And so my van went into the shop. I was holed up at her house for a few days, and it gave me the pause for self-inquiry and self-reflection and groundedness. And I discovered that I was pregnant. When I
oh,
didn't get my blood for a while, one of the first things I did is I went and I bought a pregnancy test. And I actually just want to say to any women listening to this who ever at any point in your lives take a pregnancy test for any reasons with any desired outcome, please learn from my mistake that I have made twice now of rushing into that, because what you're undergoing of using this technology is sacred information that, regardless of what your desired outcome is, regardless of what, whether it's positive or negative, that sacred information, it has such a huge energetic charge. It's such significant, yeah, information from our bodies. And of course, we don't need pregnancy tests to obtain that information, but it definitely can fast track it. And I made this mistake of just mindlessly dissociating, peeing on a stick, and then just getting like overwhelmed with the vastness of carrying life and how profound that is. And so my prayer is that women who listen to this hold the intention to, wherever you are, if you are ever going to pee on a stick, please
mm,
ground yourself and just at
mm,
least breathe, at least inspire yourself with your breath and connect in, to be really present, to be in your body, to receive that information. Because I
mm,
have been totally floored, and in retrospect, I'm like, why would I rush into something like that has the capacity to just totally overwhelm you? So
mm,
I found out that I was pregnant, and Sebastian actually immediately flew to Austin to come be with me and holding that, which is amazing. And I'm so grateful for him that he showed up for me in that way. But
mm,
we weren't on the same page. I was very much just in the profound sacred mystery and vastness of this huge initiation, that I was carrying life in my womb, and I was totally surprised by, and also um yeah that I was just totally surprised by, um and I wanted to just take time to feel into it, to connect with this baby.
Mm.
And Sebastian, as many men do, I think, was moving into a very like logical way, rational way of thinking about it, which was not at all the nature of my process.
Mhm.
And, well, are we like questions about like, where are we going to live and work and save for this child's college fund? And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa.
That's not where I'm at.
So needless to say, very quickly, he was kicked out of the van. He like stayed with me for a couple states over. And then I was like, okay, from New Mexico back to California, this is going to be solo, connecting in with my womb time. He got kicked out. But we weren't meeting each other where we were at. And it was just such a beautiful new initiation for both of us in so many ways, and also a painful time. And let's see, eventually felt like, because of the disagreement and because of the fighting, that I had been poisoned, and that excitement and that deep connection I felt with the spark of life in my womb, um, it vanished, and I felt poisoned. I felt very sick, and um, yeah, I arrived at my no. And part of how I arrived at my no, after, doing this solo soul searching of driving back to California and every day being more and more rooted into my yes, I woke up one morning and I decided to try on this exercise where I would embody my no for 24 hours. As much as I felt like I was leaning towards this yes, I was like, okay, I at least owe it to myself or to Sebastian or whoever, or I don't owe it to anyone. But what I decided to do was to embody my no and just find out what it would feel like if I decided that it wasn't my time to carry that pregnancy. And but I was like, I'm not doing it today. I'll do it tomorrow. So I roll over the next morning, look at my phone, one of the first things that I did. And a new podcast had just come out from Amber Magnolia Hill's Medicine Stories podcast, if you're familiar with
I was
that.
just listening to that this morning, her
Oh,
podcast this
amazing.
morning.
Yeah, I love her so much. I don't know her personally, but yeah, her podcast has certainly been medicine stories for me in so
Yeah.
many ways. And it was the episode about herbal abortion. And I
Mm.
thought, whoa, this is spooky. Um, and I had just been inundated with connection with divinity and with the spirit child in the most absurd of ways. I was 22, it was 2022. My grandmother, who I'm very close with, had my mother when she was 22. Um, the woman, Silvana, who raised me, started working with our family when she was 22. I turned 22 in October, which was this weird month where there was 2 full moons in October. And as I was traveling in my van, I was like, every time that I would get a receipt, that I would fill my gas, that I would look at the odometer, that I would look at the clock, it was 1 1 1 1 2 2 2 2 2 1 2 1 2, like just the universe is screaming at me, pay attention.
Mm.
And that was such a portal for me, and such a huge, the biggest of initiations, actually, I really feel. um yeah, as big as becoming a mother, because in some ways I did, of course I didn't, I didn't become a mother by birthing a child, but I did start peeking through that portal as I carried life in my womb for the first time. And anyway, I listened to Amber's podcast. I learned a lot. I thought this was interesting. And for the first time, it felt digestible to me, this option
Mm.
of releasing this pregnancy.
Mm.
And oh gosh, yeah, it's so emotional and vulnerable. I've never shared this story before, certainly not publicly like this, but I'm honored to. And
Well,
part
thank
of
you.
the resistance I had was I couldn't visualize myself going into a clinic, and I couldn't visualize engaging with the medical system to go, because what I was experiencing was so sacred. My whole orientation to what my body was experiencing was like out in vast expanses of wild nature, being on the earth, being in deep, profound spiritual connection. And that was my experience. So going into like a sterile office, sterile,
Mhm.
and, you know, being touched and having this extracted from me or being given whatever. That just wasn't going to be my path. I couldn't visualize it. I couldn't try it on. And I realized that that was mostly what I was having the resistance to. So in the medicine stories from Amber's podcast, when it opened this other door for me, that there could be another way, I realized that that was what I would do. And I obtained a whole series of different types of herbal medicines and essentially free birth my pregnancy release at home. And yeah, I think there's so much that we could do a whole episode on that topic alone.
Yeah.
And so I won't get into that as much, but needless to say, it was a huge initiation to go through a birth experience, to know that I could go through a birth experience at home by myself, and collect the contents of my womb, build an altar, be in my prayers, be in my privacy, be self-paced, and return that to the ocean, return the contents of my womb and that little spirit baby to the ocean. And I realized shortly thereafter and through the experience that that would never happen to me again. I would never be in that position again. I would never be that woman again. And that thus begun my just ravenous appetite for wisdom and education. And thus I pursued my, I think when we were on that blood mystery school roundtable, Nancy asked me to speak a little bit about this as something I had talked to her about previously, that there's no wise woman university. There's nowhere that like we can go to learn about everything under the sun of the, divine wild feminine and being with each other and birth and pregnancy. And so I think things like the blood mystery school and the radical birth keeper school come close to filling some of that. And so I just started cherry picking from all of the wise women mentors I wanted to learn with. And I quickly enrolled with Rochelle Garcia Saliga in innate traditions postpartum certification training. I enrolled in the radical birth keeping school. And I was in a significant amount of pain, emotional pain. Just that was the darkest time of my life going through that. Actually, I was extremely depressed and heartbroken. And so I realized that the best way that I could heal that was to look it right in the eyes and go deeper and resource myself and face it, not hide from it, not, numb out, not, turn away from my womb, but really get curious about the mystery and the magic of her. And I knew, like, okay, if I feel this amount of grief and I felt that amount of connection to that baby, I obviously know I want to be a mother, and I want to be the best, most resource prepared that I possibly can be. And that's not readily available in our societal norms. So I wanted to just learn everything I possibly could about what was in alignment with me for pregnancy, birth, postpartum, mothering, herbalism, nutrition, all of it. So I dove in and yeah, let's see. When did I took the first round of blood mystery school. That was spring 2022. Maybe actually I was wrong about the year. Maybe I was 21 and it was 2021. I think I said 22.
Yeah.
I was 21 years old and it was, yeah. So everything I said previously about 22, it was 21. That's why I was seeing the ones and twos.
Well, I do want to just pause for a second and just say thank you to you for sharing your big, intense, and beautiful story of, your sovereign abortion. I mean, that's something that I don't think is talked about very often, like how we can still stand in our power, even in a time that, pregnancy and birth are quite medicalized, but I would say that pregnancy release is even more medicalized. Because there are women who feel, like, okay, yeah, I can have a home birth, but I don't know many women who feel that they can release their pregnancy at home. And I think also you being 21 is really, really impressive and beautiful that you were able to hold the space for yourself to, like you said, fully face what you were moving through with such yeah, intention. I'm really, really moved by that. Thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah, I'm honored to. And something that I've experienced as becoming a mother is that my recollection of dates is like absolutely scrambled eggs. So I wrote notes of like things in my timeline, and I realized that that pregnancy release was actually winter 2020. So anyway, just for a more accurate timeline. Um, yeah. And huge initiation to resourcing myself in wanting to be a guardian of collective wise women traditions and wise women wisdom that I had to really search for. And I know that I want this type of information and wisdom that is a remembering and is all of our birthrights to be at the fingertips of my daughter, and for that just to be something that is normal, that is woven into the mesh of our family and our family culture, and that she doesn't have to search high and low and worldwide to resource herself to yeah, learning about the wisdom of her body, and that that's just something that she knows because it can be passed down to her and so forth through the generations. So, um, yeah, going through RPK school, going through innate traditions, studying in pelvic health intensives, just all of it really was the beginning of Margot's conception journey and getting me ready to meet her and to birth her. And I, at this point, had sold my van, bought a truck with a camper shell on it, was driving across country again, and I wanted to, yeah, double whammy women's festivals by going to Spirit Weavers and then Matriarch Rising. And that was when I first met you.
Aw.
And I think that part of her conception journey really begins with a profound ceremony that I sat in with you, with Sister Morningstar, where we created a womb vortex. And as I recall, she had the center circle of pregnant women sitting together back to back with a circle of women who want to conceive. And this was where like the crucial distinction was whether it's like, do you want to conceive right now, or are you just holding that energetic intention for the future? And I obviously wasn't super clear about that with my looming spirit children who took it very literally. And then around all of us was, yeah, a dancing, singing, drumming, certain other circle of women who are already mothers. And in that spiral, we literally created a vortex as we sang together, wild woman, mother, midwife, and healer, we will give birth.
Yeah.
And so it was.
Yeah.
um, so I left Matriarch Rising just totally reinvigorated in my life, on my path. And at that point, I was thinking that I was going to separate from Sebastian. We had really, you know, after the pregnancy release, it just opened up a lot of wounding. And part of my desire to go on that big cross country journey again and seek in person women and sister community and connection, yeah, was because I was thinking that I was going on this solo trajectory. But simultaneous to me, he realized that he was undergoing a massive healing as well. And he sought out mentorship and community immersion for specifically for intimacy healing. And yeah, just did amazing work in his community with really confessing and sharing about the ways that he had hurt me and being really embodying accountability and pursuing growth and up leveling and becoming the man that he wants to be and is becoming. So he was just undergoing this massive healing, and I'm just like, okay, I'm moving on. This isn't happening. But clearly, Margot had different intentions for us. So after Matriarch Rising, I went to Martha's Vineyard, and I was living on this farm, working and living out of my truck and farming. And I've been going to this island since I was a young child, so it's a very significant place for me. And Sebastian asked if he could come and stay for a weekend. I was like, okay, he can stay for a couple days. He, of course, ended up living in the back of my truck with me for 3 weeks. And I was like, well, this is a working farm. Like, you better get to work. There's a lot to do. And so through this coming together, we would wake up early, go tend to the land and harvest and whatever. It would get really hot. We'd go jump in the ocean, eat amazing, island fresh meat and seafood and dairy and raw goat's milk and just like oysters and all, in peak summertime, basically the
Yeah.
most healthy, delicious, bioavailable, nutritious food that we could possibly be preparing our bodies for conception with, which we
Wow.
love. And just getting really strong, working the land, being in the sunshine and the ocean, outside 24/7, sleeping with the camper open under the stars. And every night we for hours would dive deep into self-reflection and conversations about healing our relationship. And he's a avid journaler every single day. I'm so amazed and impressed by his diligence in that. And so he had this really detailed journal of self-reflection about who he was, the journey he was going through, what he was wanting to shift, who he was becoming. And he guided me through resuscitating and healing and revitalizing our relationship, because I was like, I've put so much energy into this. I'm not taking the wheel anymore. If you really are serious about this, like, let's show up. And he fully did. And I was just amazed by the transformed man that he became. And just saw how he really initiated himself. And it's just so beautiful and amazing the way that we connected and really renewed our commitments to each other and our relationship. And we're simultaneously getting very, very healthy. And I had my last bleed on that island. So there was one night that the sun was setting. There was a beautiful sunset, and we were probably about to go dive into our like deep interpersonal conversations about growth and reflection. And all of a sudden this black cat showed up. We had never seen that cat before, and it had a rabbit in its mouth, and it dropped the rabbit right before us, basically, and then darted off. And we were like, whoa, what's this? And I had just been really interested in learning about hide tanning and honoring animals' whole bodies. And here was like this freshly killed rabbit. It was still warm right in front of us, and we thought, well, let's do something with this. We should honor it. But I wanted to practice preserving its hide, and we thought that we would eat it as well, but we learned soon that a lot of the rabbits on the island actually have a lot of diseases, so we decided
Not to eat
not
it.
to. But anyhow, we went through this process of really breathing life back into death by honoring the skin of this rabbit. And that was a powerful ceremony for us. And I'm sharing it because I have this anklet that I always wear that was given to me by my family acupuncturist when I was 6 years old. And it has all of the Chinese zodiac animals carved in jade on it. I'm looking at it right now as I hold it. And I don't, I've had it since I was 6 years old. I haven't worn it continuously since I was 6 years old, but I just like, I don't know, very recently before that occurred, I decided to put it back on. So
Mm.
I was wearing this anklet. This rabbit was dropped in front of us. We're
Yeah.
intimately engaging with its body and its life. And um, just weeks. Yeah, and I was bleeding at the time.
Mm.
And that was my very last blood. And
Oh.
it's significant because my daughter ended up being born in the Chinese zodiac year of the water rabbit. And here we were,
Oh.
island, with all of these rabbit omens that just persisted throughout her pregnancy. Um, and so, yeah, this bunny that came and yeah, what else do I want to share about that last bleed? That it was just like, I felt so good. My blood was so vibrant and healthy. Sebastian was there making me burgers and steaks. And at some point in the playfulness of that bleed, I ended up initiating him with my blood. Like that was the first time that I actually
Mm.
put my blood on his face. And
Wow.
it was just all in like playfulness and wildness and us just having fun and being silly and rambunctious and connecting intimately. Um, but it is profound to me when I look back, retrospectively. It wasn't like at the time I was like, and now I initiate you with my blood, so we will go forth and conceive our daughter. It wasn't like
No,
that
I
at
mean, it seems like the whole
all.
story is like you two were in conscious conception without realizing you were in conscious conception.
Exactly. That's actually very well put because yeah, and here I had just come from this like profound ceremony with Sister Morningstar of like calling in my
Yeah.
child and he was doing his work and we got so healthy and so yeah, that is the story of my last bleed and we're traveling cross country together and yeah, and she was conceived in August, the end of August of that year, which is 2022, and she was born in May 2023. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's like really incredible to see, because that's something when I think about what I want in my own conscious conception journey, I'm I think about, the diet stuff is big, like nourishment, but there's also the piece around like your inner work and doing the inner work in your relationship to remove resentments and yeah, long-standing issues. And it's so sweet to hear that like that was just naturally happening. Like there was this greater plan being weaved and you two were just trusting it and following it and probably a little surprised by it maybe, but
Yeah.
yeah, I would love to hear about that, like about what that was like realizing you're pregnant again. And I mean, we've got like 25 minutes if you want to share whatever you want to share about that maiden to mother transition.
Yeah, certainly. I know I'd love to. Yeah, it was just so easeful and natural. And like I've said, I knew I would never be that woman again who received this sacred news of carrying life and felt disoriented. And I was like, oh, well, great. I know what to do now. I'm just gonna keep doing everything I am doing. And um oh gosh, so I chose a wild pregnancy and the news was received extremely welcome by both me and Sebastian and uh
Mhm.
we were very excited about it and um oh gosh, it's just sweet to reflect on that time. uh yeah, I was living in this really beautiful off-grid year in the Santa Cruz Mountains with one of my closest friends at the time, who actually is the only other person and the woman I invited to be at my birth, only
Mhm.
other person other than my husband. And I told her first, actually, and then she and I made a really amazing dinner, and we ended up hiding my positive pregnancy test in a cake that we served.
That's so cute.
Yeah, and it was a sweet and exciting time. So we knew I was living like half at that time, because I had been traveling in my truck, and then I was living part-time in San Francisco in my apartment with Sebastian, but I really didn't want to be in the city anymore where he was very grounded. So yeah, I was living down in that year with Sydney. We knew it was time to find a new home together that was down in the Santa Cruz area. So yeah, a lot of my pregnancy was, I was very sick in my first, yeah, until about 23 weeks, actually. I was throwing up almost every day,
Oh no.
which I thought was interesting too, because she was born on the 23rd.
Oh
And
wow.
there's just all this numerology with her. Yeah, what do I want to share about this? My pregnancy was really chill. I ate great. I was well taken care of. I just spent lots of time in the elements and the sunshine and
Mm,
swimming and camping and um, nesting, homemaking. We moved into our new home,
mm.
and yeah, I felt great for the rest of my pregnancy. And for my 40 weeks, I decided to go camping like 3.5 hours from home and go like jumping in waterfalls and rivers, swimming holes. And she was actually born 3 days after that camping trip, which
Wow.
it's just funny looking back because, in my mind's eye at the time, I remember we were rolling up to the campsite and our friend ran up to us and he was like, "Hey, Kate, having any contractions?" And I was like, "Oh, no, no, I'm not." But, like I totally could be.
It
And
could be.
spoiler alert, Margot's entire birth was 3.5 hours. So now I realize, like, I was telling myself at the time, like, well, if I give birth out here in the wilderness, like, great, there's, a river and our friends are here and it'll be fine. It'll be wonderful. But I
Love
also kind of
that.
thought, like, I'll have time. Like, I'll know. If it's really happening and I want to go home, I'll have time to get in the car and drive 3.5 hours. And actually, I wouldn't have at that time probably. So next time around, I probably won't go camping far from my house past my 40 weeks, but maybe I will. Who knows? Yeah, and we got home from that camping trip. That was like really special, and we set a lot of intentions with, this couple who is some of our closest friends, and we knew that our lives would be changed. We always would go on camping trips, the four of us, and that was our last time that it would just be the four of us. Uh,
Yeah.
so we got home. I was finishing prepping my postpartum freezer. I had been on my feet absolutely all day long from, yeah, like 10 a.m. to 10:30 p.m., cooking, cooking, cooking. And around 11, I told Sebastian that all I wanted to do was get in bed with a cup of pudding and watch a show with him and have him rub my feet. And we got in bed and, only got a few minutes into the show when I was just like totally in a psychedelic, otherworldly experience. Couldn't focus at all. Got up to have my spontaneous cleansing of yeah, go to the bathroom and brush my teeth. And he kind of could tell that like something was happening. And so he came over to see how I was doing. And I couldn't even talk at that. Like it just came on so quickly. So I just draped my arms around him and just was kind of giddy in the holding of the secret that I had, that I knew something was going on. Um, but I hadn't really told him yet. And yeah, just I'll always remember that hug that we had, that last really intentional moment of intimacy
Mm.
before becoming parents together, and just be the luxury of just being in complete presence and connection. Um, yeah, I felt like we didn't have a hug that was that meaningful for like many months after she was born. So I always like looked back and cherished it. Um, yeah, and then I was just on 0 to 100, and he filled up the birth tub for me. which is this, yeah, beautiful bathtub that randomly our friends had called us and we're like, hey, do you want to borrow our bathtub? And I was like trying to organize what my, I knew I wanted water available to me in my birth. And I was trying to figure out what that was going to be. And it was like this cast iron, like antique tub that was called literally the item name of it is called the birthday tub. And so
Ah,
my friend was like, do you want to borrow the birthday tub? And I was like, yeah, I'll give birth in it.
that's
I didn't.
incredible.
I labored in it. And I, yeah, there's so much to share about my birth story. And this isn't necessarily you know, a podcast devoted to birth stories. So without getting into it like so detailed, I lit a candle on my altar and climbed out of the tub. And when I was 33 weeks pregnant, I had tanned a sheep hide with Margot and me. She really worked on it with me, honestly, that labor of love. And
Mm.
it took 4 whole days of intense work. And I feel like that was like the real lengthy part of my labor because I ended up laboring and birthing right with that sheepskin. So yeah, I went through a transition when I was still in the water, and that what that looked like for me was saying to Sebastian, no matter what, don't give up on me. Like even if I think I can't do it, you need to believe in me no matter what. And he said, I got you, of course you can do this, whatever, whatever sweet things he said. And it was a little bit disorienting to me because I didn't have a bloody show or lose my mucus plug. I didn't have any leaking waters.
Mm.
So many of the signs that a lot of women experience that labor is happening, I didn't. So even though I was at the level of intensity of going through transition, I didn't know that. And I had never experienced birth before. So I thought, gosh, if it's this intense, I don't know that I could do this for another 10, 20, 30 hours, whatever. Um, and I got that validation that he wouldn't give up on me no matter what, even if I started doubting myself. And I got out of the tub on hands and knees, and then I saw just a few drops of blood, and I thought, ah. And there it was again, really connecting with my blood, and it was so welcome.
Mm.
And I missed my blood during my pregnancy, and just to see blood coming out of
Ah,
my yoni again
yeah.
was like so amazing. It was my power reflected back to me. It was my divine, wild, feminine nature reflected back to me. And soon thereafter, I reached down and I felt her water bag bulging out of me. As I said, her waters never opened until she was born. So
Wow,
she was born on call. And
that's amazing.
yeah. Early at the beginning of my pregnancy, I went to celebrate Yom Kippur, and I uh, there's this amazing organization called Wilderness Torah that facilitates an overnight camping experience for celebrating this holiday. And one aspect is um, this elder ancestral connection uh, workshop, I guess, that I participated in. And
Mm.
these elders took me through this guided meditation about if you were to call a council of your ancestors, who would be there and what would you talk about? Who would show up to your council of ancestors? And immediately my grandfather, my papa, showed up clear as day, and there he was, and he was holding the hands of my child. And I was very newly pregnant at this point, and he told me that he would be walking with her through my pregnancy, looking after her and protecting her until she passed through the portal of birth and into this realm. And throughout my pregnancy, every time that I felt, you know, anxious or sad or anything at all, he would just show up. There was his energy, and I could feel him holding my hand.
Mm.
So when he was, something about him in his life is that he always saw the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. He always would like wake up in the middle of the night and see 1, 2, 3, 4 on the clock. And after he passed, my grandmother and I and other family members, we started seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, and we knew he was, right there with us. And So it's not surprising that I had that connection with him at the beginning of my pregnancy, and Margot was born at 2:34 a.m. and I
Wow.
was born myself at 2:33 a.m. So,
Ah,
and Papa was always had a sense of humor, and I feel like he told Margot, he's like, you can borrow the one from the difference between 2:33 and 2:34 because
ah,
you're not born right now. You're gonna have to wait another I don't know how many
oh
hours. Um,
my God.
so she slipped right out, splashed into her daddy's hands at 2:34, and yeah, she was born on 5/23/23. So lots of fives in her birthday, and she was named after her matriarchs as well. My grandmother's name is Marcia Gold, and her grandmother, her mother's name was Margaret, and her maiden name was Gordon. So there's this G-O from Gordon and from Gold, and Papa's last name was Gold. So Margot has the M-A-R from Margaret and Marcia, her great grandmother and her great grandmother both, and then the G-O from both of their last names. Um,
Wow.
and my grandmother, she's one of five, and we always call them the big five. And yeah, they lived on a dairy farm called Marquet Farms, and all five of the children, my grandmother included, their names begin with M-A-R. So
Mm,
all of them, um, yeah, Marlene, Marcia, Mark, Marion, and Marshall, all
wow.
um, the children of Margaret. So the big five and MAR is like a big theme on my maternal line of my family. And yeah, it was just not at all surprising that her birthday in a way is 555. It's 52323. She was born at 234, and yeah, I just really had this magical birth, and that continued easily into an amazing postpartum where I just felt so held and supported by my community, and yeah, by friends and family. And I took my whole extended 40 days, 6 weeks of rest, and basically stayed in bed the whole time to really
Yeah.
my healing and connection with her. So, um,
Mm.
yeah, that's I guess what I'll share about my birth and my postpartum experience.
Wow. I love that birth story. And I love the numerology that goes within it, the time that she was born and your grandfather, like that's so special. And also that she was born a minute later than you. That's so, so interesting.
It
Yeah.
is a good friend of mine, that one of my closest friends now, who I met at the very beginning of my pregnancy through the Free Birth Society community. She and I started our village prenatal circle together while we were pregnant, and she free birthed her son 24 hours before Margot was born.
Wow.
So he was born on May 22nd, and her entire birth was 2 hours. And then Margot was born in 3.5 hours the very next day, almost at the same time of day. So it was really, really special to, yeah, her, she had great timing.
Yeah, it's so sweet that you could go through the pregnancy and like the postpartum and now the mothering chapters with someone who's like so close in that with you. That's really special. I'm also curious, I love that you said your postpartum was really nourishing and that you took that time for yourself and um yeah, like got the food you needed and the support you needed. So that's like, in this blood mysteries talk, birth and postpartum kind of are that second blood mystery. And I kind of think postpartum even more really is because that's like such a such a yin time of resting. And, there's that saying that like the blood mysteries, the golden opportunities in Chinese medicine is what they're also called. It's an opportunity to establish health or do the opposite. So I'm curious like how your postpartum changed you. Like how has that impacted you?
Hmm. Well, it's such a gift. I mean, that time when you're in it, it feels like lifetimes, and then retrospectively, it's a blink. And so I am so grateful that I honored that time the way that I did, to just go so slow, slower than I ever have known to go before. And when I, would start maybe speeding up a little, to remember that I could always slow back down. And I think that that really impacted just the trajectory of the bond and relationship with my daughter a lot, that just to be so committed to presence and availability and connection with her. And of course, it's extremely hard. I don't want to sound like, oh, my postpartum was just this total walk in the park and it's easy to, the initiation of new parenthood is just so fast. Um,
Mm,
but because, and it was challenging even within really setting myself up for slowness and support, and having, gone through innate traditions and known how to, walking with other families through postpartum, and all of the information that I already had that so many women don't, going into that experience for the first time. Um, and still it's challenging. And so in that golden postpartum time, you're meeting your, how do I say this? You're expanding, you're meeting where your previous boundaries and limitations of yourself have been, and just bursting through them every single day, multiple times a day. And it can feel like hitting a wall. It can feel like, oh my gosh, this is challenging. How do I do this? I'm drowning or whatever. And you hit that wall that is your edge, and
mm,
then expand. And that's just the only way that that motherhood occurs, is
mm,
this infinite expansion. And that theme has stayed true through this whole first year of mothering. And I know that from talking to the many friends of mine who are mothers of multiple children, that doesn't end. We just keep expanding and expanding as mothers. And I try to remind myself of that whenever I am hitting a wall, that's me finding my edge, and now I'm growing, and now I'm going to embrace the vastness and become the ocean, and hold more. And so in postpartum, the early postpartum days, I feel like the frequency of that for me was just it's just so much more intense, and you're finding those edges are getting really, really clear, and you're relearning your body of where your womb and your belly are in time and space. And there's just so much self-discovery that's going on as you also discover and learn who your child is.
mm,
So and both of those are infinitely unfolding. So I guess it just like really giving myself the gift of presence in the postpartum time really helped me have foresight into what that process was going to continue to be like.
mm. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I have one final question for you. And, we've gone through so much of your womb story, and I'm so grateful that you've, yeah, like had the vulnerability and the courage and the desire to come here and share such medicine in it. And if there's one piece of womb wisdom, is what I like to call it, like all of this is like we're just gaining wisdom from these womb initiations. If there's one thing you'd like to leave the women listening with, what would that be?
Well, I just got quiet and wanted to see what was going to come through. And this song that my dear sister Nina taught me, I don't know all the lyrics to it, but the lyrics to this song showed up. So I suppose that's what wants to be left here for the listeners. And the lyrics of it are you always know, but you don't always know that you know. You always know, but you don't always know that you know. So the song goes on, and it's beautiful. And it talks about listening to the wise woman who lives at the well. And it's a beautiful song, but the mantra of those lyrics is what came through. And that's what I think is the most important thing in all of this work, is trying um, to access true healing for ourselves. And when we walk with women, that can only happen in a non-hierarchical way. And so not putting other, teachers or spiritual leaders or mentors or whatever onto a pedestal, and thinking that, just because somebody has something to teach you, that they know more than you ever could know about your unique medicine and your body and your wisdom. And if you are on the path of cultivating a deep relationship with your womb, of healing your cycle, of wanting to conceive or go through the threshold of motherhood, whatever works for you and whatever your truth is going to be so unique, and only you can ever know that. And so sometimes we feel like we need to outsource to gain information or gain wisdom, and certainly that's something that I've spent a lot of time doing. But that which is most potent and most true always returns to that which is a remembrance, and that which is really waking up these codes in our body of what it is that we already know intuitively, and strengthening that muscle of our intuition and the womb heart connection, the voice of our womb. And it really all can be said so simply as, you don't always, you always know, but you don't always know that you know. And so just having grace with ourselves, having patience and forgiveness and empathy for the ever unfolding path of learning and remembering, is what I would like to leave women with today. And when we first started, before we started recording, I shared with you this altar that I made behind me, really an altar that is just imbued with the intention that this unique story medicine, not only from myself and what I've shared today, but as you will continue to gather and sow through this podcast, my prayer is that it finds the listeners, it finds the women for whom it will be medicine for, and may it be a light. May it flow through with ease and land where it's needed at this time to do the healing work, so that our daughters and our granddaughters can be born and live and grow up into a world and a culture where we remember the divine, wild feminine, and our blood is known as sacred, that women are honored in these initiations and these rites of passage, and that we have deep reverence for the sacred gift that it is to be a woman.
So beautifully said. Thank you, Kate. Yeah, the intention here really is that it is somewhere, that it is like a safe haven for women, really, to open them up and also to drop them into a deep remembrance, as you shared, and for it to be a place where we realize like that we really are all walking the same path. It just takes a little bit of a different flavor for each of us. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your stories. I would love for you to share your offerings and how women can find you.
Yeah. Well, you can find me in the Santa Cruz Mountains in Bonnie Doon. Come to an in-person gathering. I host 2 circles every month in my home. One is a village prenatal, and the other is a postpartum connection circle. And I am really all about in-person connection, and I don't exist as much on the interwebs and online spaces, although I do hope to find the willingness to grow in that direction at some point. I am on Instagram at Katie Oakley, KATYOAKLEY. And so you can find me and connect with me there. And we can get you looped into the email thread if you are in the Santa Cruz area or Bay Area, or even down near Monterey, or even Marin. We have women that commute from all over to come be an in-person circle and ceremony with us. And that's how I love to connect. And yeah, for any listeners who have any questions or would like to connect for pregnancy, birth, postpartum support or offerings, that's also something that I'm available for. And yeah, thanks so much, Natalie. It's been so much fun and such an honor to be asked these intimate, profound questions.
Yeah, of course. Such an honor to have you here. Thank you, Kate. Thank you for tuning in to the wisdom of the womb today. It's truly an honor to bring these stories forward, and it would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast so that it can reach even more women. If you're looking for deeper support, you can find the link to book a one-on-one virtual session in the show notes. See you next week.